And good evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's live webinar. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Scott Witkoff, and I've been spending a long time looking at progressive messaging and progressive communications, particularly in Wisconsin, and thought that this election would be a great opportunity for us to sit back and take a look at how this election played out and look at it from a slightly different point of view than you've been hearing probably in the media and from most political pundits. Because unlike a lot of people, I believe and know that messaging is a lot more than just words on paper. It's ideas, it's vision, it motivates, it unites, it can inspire people, it can bring people together when it's done right. And when it's not done well, when it's done ineffectively, it can have some pretty significant ramifications, and we're going to look at some of those. So before we get started, if you are watching on YouTube, which most of you are, you're going to see a chat box, which will have your little icon next to it, say something. That's how we can communicate. Feel free to ask questions, comment at any time. There are going to be specific places where I'll ask for your feedback. I'll ask for your ideas. You can use an emoticon. You can just keep it clean because we are recording this. And my plan is tomorrow to put this on the homepage of my website. So keep it clean. Otherwise, I'll have to completely delete all the chat from the video, and that wouldn't be good because I'm sure there'll be some insightful things communicated today. So without any further ado, let's get started. As you saw when you first logged in, this idea that what happened in Wisconsin is this was not a one-time, this was not just a singular event. This has been building for a long, long time. And one of the things that I've learned over the past several years is that something matters more than issues. Actually, something matters more than facts to people, that people's values and beliefs matter. And when you can connect with people's values and beliefs, it can have a bipartisan effect on people. And we actually saw that in two cases this election cycle. One of them was with Bernie Sanders, who did not win the nomination. The other, of course, was with Donald Trump. And we're going to see the results of that coming up very shortly here. So there were a couple of things that happened this election that were really striking when you look at the raw numbers. The first one is that Wisconsin Democrats really didn't show up. Wisconsin, for the last many actually presidential elections, has been a blue state. In fact, it was thought to be solidly, by most pundits, solidly in Hillary Clinton's column before the election even happened. Thus, as in hindsight we know, flawed conventional wisdom did not have her visiting the state. But one of the things we look at with the numbers is that from the 2012 Obama election to this year, 117,000 less total votes were cast this year than in 2012. So that's total votes statewide. What's fascinating about that number is that the next piece of information there, 230,000 less votes cast for presidential tickets. So this is interesting. This is 250,000 less votes cast for the presidential ticket than in previous years, which, what does that tell us? It tells us that people voted for U.S. Senator, they voted for their local races, for state assembly, some of the state Senate races, but they didn't vote for president. So that tells us something. Trump received 6,000 more votes than Romney did in 2012, so he performed a little bit better than Romney, not a big margin there. But the next number was to me predictable, but shocked a lot of people. Hillary Clinton received 236,000 less votes than Obama did in 2012. And that was consistent with the national trend. So Wisconsin was not an outlier. This was a trend. This was not a singular event. So really interesting numbers there. But the numbers tell us something. And when you look at some underlying factors, we see some consistencies nationwide about these numbers. Is that just as Clinton lost Wisconsin, typically Democratic state for president of late, compared to 2012, Clinton lost ground among women voters. These are nationwide numbers now. This is not specific to Wisconsin. Lost 5% of women voters from 2012, and even a greater number of white women voters. She lost 5% of the youth under 30 vote. She lost 6% of the African American vote, and she lost 5% of the Hispanic vote. And again, this is nationwide. This was a trend that was consistent with what we saw in Wisconsin. And out of that, the New York Times had a fantastic map, which when I put this on my website, I will put the PowerPoint slides up there so you can take a look at them for yourself. But you look at this as an amazing map that the New York Times put up, which shows us the red arrows, all the red that you see there on the map, are gains that Trump made across, and this is by county, across the nation versus 2012. So each one of those red arrows there represents a swing to the right in a specific county in the nation compared to 2012. And you see a few blue arrows out in the Colorado, Utah area, kind of along the East Coast there. You see some blue, but you see a huge swath of red, and it's largely, again, in the upper Midwest. Now, this is, again, some people would like to look at this as a wave, as a one-time incident, but I would argue that as we've seen in Wisconsin, and here's the trend that's been emerging, you look at 2008 on your left there, 2008, look specifically in western Wisconsin, those counties along the Mississippi River, how solidly red, or sorry, how solidly blue, I'm getting ahead of myself, solidly blue those counties are. Then 4 years later in 2012, we see they're less blue, and you see in the central part of the state emerging, trending toward red. And then of course you see this year where that entire western part of the state that had been reliably blue in presidential elections shifted to red. So an emerging trend, and this is telling us something. And unfortunately, some of the rationalization that we're hearing is largely based on false reason, and that false reason being what is thought to be basically what the playbook is, what the political playbook is for Democrats and progressives in Wisconsin and in the nation, which is basically how the Clinton campaign was run. And here are what I consider to be kind of the top four rationalizations that we're hearing and what's wrong with them based on what we know. So the first one that I heard a lot, and I've seen a lot, is this idea that this was an anti-establishment tsunami, right? So it's massive wave. I've heard people calling it a wave election, a one-time wave. It's an anti-establishment. It's all over the press. Here's the problem with that, and somebody within the Democratic Party pointed this out to me, that look, in Wisconsin especially, you had the incumbent party and largely establishment Republican incumbents increased their majorities in both legislative houses of the state. So if this is an anti-establishment tsunami, how does that happen? Right? If there's more votes for the down ballot races like Assembly and Senate in Wisconsin, and the people running for Republicans are largely establishment type Republicans, and they increase their majority in both houses, how is that an anti-establishment tsunami? Right? So there's a bit of a paradox there, which as we go on here, I hope you will understand that this wasn't a tsunami, it's an emerging trend. The second one is redistricting. Now, I will acknowledge that the redistricting, which has been found unconstitutional, and it'll be fascinating to see where that goes politically, but we have to acknowledge that redistricting could have cost a couple seats in the Assembly. There were some very tight races in the Assembly, which, granted, could have gone differently had there been fair maps. However, when you go back to those county by county shifts, which I'm going to go back to just to illustrate the point, you look at the county by county shifts, those have nothing to do with redistricting. Those are shifts that are happening at the county level, so not necessarily related to any kind of redistricting. And then it also lessens the point that Donald Trump won the Electoral College. So yes, Hillary Clinton won the popular vote. So we need to communicate to people that Trump is our nation's, he's a minority president. He does not represent the majority. But he won the states that you needed to win. And he did it by changing the map, many of those areas from blue to red. So, redistricting, yes, it's a problem, but it is not a reason for the outcome of this election. The third rationalization or excuse that I've heard a lot of is that voter ID cost Dems the election because of disenfranchised people in Milwaukee. As you're going to see a little bit later, that doesn't hold water. It is true that there were people, and there continue to be people, disenfranchised by voter ID. And that is a terrible thing for democracy. In fact, if one person can't exercise their freedom to vote, then democracy suffers. But in terms of this election, even the election commissioner in the city of Milwaukee, who he himself is a Democrat, disputed this theory. He acknowledged that it would not have made the difference in the election. So it is a problem that needs to be addressed, and it needs to be done in the context of bigger issues, which we'll get to. Finally, the last one, and the most insipid excuse, and the most damaging, is blaming the voters. In fact, just to get a little bit of context, this afternoon before the webinar, I was surfing around Facebook, and I was appalled at all the posts of people saying how stupid rural voters are, saying that they're hicks, saying that they vote against their own interests, that they're stupid, don't they understand the issues, and basically blaming them. When, as you just saw a slide ago, many of those same people 4 and 8 years ago voted for Barack Obama. So that is a terrible thing to do, because Democrats, particularly in Wisconsin, need to acknowledge that they need to start winning the hearts and minds of those people. And you don't do that by bad-mouthing them, by insulting them, by calling them names, saying that they don't know what they're doing. So that's one part of the really terrible aspects of that excuse. The second one is that, look, this was not just a rural problem. We've heard through the media and through a lot of pundits that this was a rural problem. And in fact, many high-level Democrats recently have been saying, we need to solve the rural problem in Wisconsin. Well, I got news for you. This isn't just a rural problem. And we're going to show you some evidence as to what I believe, based on what we know about cognitive science and the ideas of what inspires and motivates people, what the problem is. And I am presenting the idea today that Democrats have a values and beliefs problem. They have an identity problem. And if you go up to a typical Republican voter and you ask them why they're a Republican, you will get a very, very consistent answer. It will have something to do with personal liberty, freedom, and small government staying out of my life. Or that government is too entwined in our lives, it needs to butt out and let us live our lives. So you're going to hear that very consistently. But ask somebody why they're a Democrat. And you're going to get a host of issues. You're going to hear that people care about education, and they care about health care, and they care about this and that. But you're not going to hear why they care about those issues. So that's a big problem. And what we found is that many voters in both urban and rural areas stayed home, typically Democratic voters. We found that, as the numbers demonstrate, many who voted for Obama either stayed home or actually voted for Trump. And there were some great pieces in The Guardian that interviewed people in Milwaukee who had previously voted for Obama but said they were going to vote for Trump. And these are African American people living in the poorest areas of Milwaukee. So how did the Dems miss this? I mean, with the coordinated ground game and all the demographic studies they've done and all the models that they've done and all the polling, both in internal and external, how did they miss this? Right? And I would argue that they're too focused on identity politics and favorable demographic shifts. And I just did a blog on this today, this whole idea of identity politics. And the problem with that is not that we need to abandon people who experience horrific levels of inequality, both social and financial. The systemic racism, inequality where women are not treated the same as men. We have many systemic problems in terms of equality. So it's not that we set those problems aside, but we need to come up with a way to reach people at a higher level, because Republicans are reliant on identity politics. So Republicans view the world through a hierarchy where men are over women, God over man, man over nature, rich over poor, rich over poor, etc., etc. And by participating in identity politics, where we divide people by demographics and we divide people by issues and say, we're going to focus on this group, we're going to focus on this group, we are reinforcing that hierarchy, whether we realize it or not. And that's part of unconscious framing and the importance of effective messaging. And when we do that, and when we just say things like, well, our nation is getting more diverse. So as our nation gets more diverse, those people are just naturally going to, in light of identity politics and demographics, we need to start working on what matters to people. And we already know what matters to people. Their values, their beliefs inspire them, hopes and dreams motivate them, and those are the things that we need to focus on. So what I'd like to point out in some examples here is that if we really start listening to people and really start hearing what they're saying in terms of their values and beliefs, we're going to hear what matters to them. And it's going to transcend identity politics. It's going to transcend demographics. And there's clear evidence of this from the election and the campaigns and people's responses to the campaigns. So feel free to comment on any of this going forward here, because we're going to look at both urban and rural voters and kind of how they felt about the campaign. So this is from the New York Times. This was written after the election, but the report was done, or sorry, the interviews were done before the election in Milwaukee. And what's interesting is the title of the piece is "Many People in Milwaukee Neighborhood Didn't Vote and Don't Regret It." And the interviews were conducted in the poorest area of Milwaukee, based on census data. And this was a reporter for the New York Times going into a barber shop that sees a lot of traffic, and just talking to people and asking them what their feelings were. And I pulled out 4 really, really insightful quotes here. And just for the record, I didn't cherry pick. You can look at the piece yourself and see that it's consistent all across the board. So this one gentleman who works at the barber shop said that, I don't feel bad that I'm not going to vote. Before the election, he had already decided that he wasn't going to vote, and he didn't feel bad about it because both candidates were terrible. And guess what? They don't do anything for us anyway. Right? That's a consistent view of politicians, right? So the second interview, the second interview said that no president in his lifetime had ever done anything to improve the lives of black people. And this includes President Obama. And he voted for twice. And then this is one of the gentlemen who said that he was going to flip his vote and vote for Trump because they were worse off than before. So, that's a consistent theme we've heard as well. So this was actually a comment from the reporter as she interviewed people and heard what they were saying, that the biggest drags on voter turnout in Milwaukee, as in the rest of the country, were the candidates themselves. And this is an interesting quote here. To some, it was like having to choose between broccoli and liver. So, again, there's a consistent theme. And then the final one, which is a fascinating quote to me, and again, seeing that this is from an African-American person in one of the poorest areas of Milwaukee, this person said that Trump was real, unlike a lot of liberal Democrats who are just as racist but keep it hidden. And then he says this: you can reason with them all day long, but they think they know it all. They want to have control, that they know what's best for, and then in quotes, those people. So some very consistent feelings there. And here, this is in the center of Milwaukee, which is the center of the urban Democratic power structure. And look at the feelings that people are evoking about this election. So the next slide. So now this is rural Wisconsin. So this is from Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel piece later that same week, which was follow-up after the election. In western Wisconsin, Trump voters want change. And so this reporter from the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, and kudos to him, drove out to western Wisconsin and talked to people about why they voted the way they did. So what I would like you to do is pretend you don't know this is rural Wisconsin, even though I've already said it. But think of the urban voters that you just heard and relate what you're hearing in terms of how people feel about the election with what you heard from the urban voters. And I'm going to just take a quick sip of water here. So, first person, farmer. We're supposed to be one of the most prosperous countries in the world, and you know what? I'm 52 years old. I'm raising 2 kids by myself for 10 years, and I can't get ahead. Sound familiar? Next one. I just did not like Hillary. I'd have voted for Bernie. Then this person said, I did vote for Bernie in the primary. And then he talks about Trump. He's not a Washington insider. He's not owned by the oil companies. That's a lot of it, and I was hoping he'd change some things. Right? So here's a person, and this guy ended up voting for Trump, if you read the full article. So here's a guy who voted for Bernie in the primary, and then goes and votes for Trump in the general. And you just heard a lot of consistent things between urban and rural voters. Third one. So he acknowledges that Trump is no saint. This guy painted a Hillary for prison sign in his front yard at Whitehall. But for me and a lot of people that I know around here, it was a way to break the system. And we heard a lot of that. Break the system, not an insider. And we're going to look at, in terms of what influences people, what inspires people, what that means in just a second. Finally, you know, this person sounds very similar, again, to the people from Milwaukee. I think that with a lot of middle-class families, we feel that slowly everything's being taken away from us, eliminating the middle class. So there are consistencies there. And what I want to point out to you, what I want to emphasize, is that across all those people, from Milwaukee, from western Wisconsin, urban and rural areas, we are hearing common values and ideas being evoked. Right? And what is it that caused most of those people to vote for Trump? And this is a place where you can feel free to chime in. But one of the things that was most consistently evoked by people was this idea of he's not in the system. He doesn't depend on, he doesn't owe anybody anything, right? So people saw Trump as providing a positive vision that they could believe in, right? Just like the guy in western Wisconsin and the guy in the barbershop in Milwaukee, they were able to set aside just kind of the nasty things that Trump said, because he was evoking a vision of a better America where they would do better. And that was huge. That was a tremendously powerful message, the idea, make America great again. And in this political climate where conservative ideas are dominant, people are looking for an authoritarian figure to lead them towards that vision. So it was, again, an emerging trend that Trump was the perfect person to take advantage of. Now, why didn't they vote? So why didn't they vote for Hillary? Right? Why didn't people show up and vote for Hillary? Well, she didn't have that positive vision. She didn't have something to inspire people, right? It was, I'm with her. Okay, big deal. Identifying all sorts of issues that Democrats care about. Well, Republicans care about all those issues too. They just have a different view of what policies should be implemented about those issues, right? And they're communicating a positive moral vision of you having more personal freedom and getting government out of your life that people can relate to. So, it was not an inspiring message. It wasn't positive. It was about attacking Trump. And when you attack your opponent without having that positive message for people to believe in, you end up primarily reinforcing your opponent's ideas, which happened. And so the question that I want to pose to all of you is, and I have some ideas, and feel free to share yours as well, is how do we win hearts and minds? I mean, do we already have ideas and values that will inspire and motivate people? And my answer to that is yes. And those are things that I've been talking about, other people have been talking about, that we really need to start emphasizing. Because that is what is going to bring people together as opposed to dividing people. So what I'm going to propose is, this is a large, big picture idea, but it is a point where we need to start. Because when you look at why people voted for Trump, okay, people voted for him because he provided a very clear picture of freedom in his conservative frame, in his conservative worldview. Freedom in his worldview being freedom to do whatever the hell you want without regard for others because you're successful. And we're going to use democracy to get government out of your lives, because when that happens, then you'll be successful. So that's the dominant view of democracy and freedom today. I'm saying we need to start redefining democracy and freedom right now, because most people understand it in their own self-interest and this idea of a hierarchy, right? The further up on the hierarchy you are, the more freedom you deserve to have, and the more democracy can work for you. That's the dominant worldview of democracy and freedom today. So we need to change that. So how do we do that? We need to emphasize the bullet points that I have there on the screen. And the progressive idea of freedom starts with empathy. And empathy is something that everybody has. So we'll go to the big talking head on the screen here for a minute. So empathy is something that we're hardwired with. You know, we have mirror neurons that if I suddenly on the screen here, if somebody came up behind me and dumped a big thing of ice water over my head, you would have an instant unconscious reaction to seeing that occur. And you have no control over it. It just happens instantaneously. That's mirror neurons at work, because you seeing that happen, there are neurons in your brain that fire the same way that they fire in mine. So you can literally experience what other people are experiencing just by seeing it. So that's critically important to understand, because we have these mirror neurons and we're hardwired for empathy. It's part of our DNA. So we need to start activating that. And the way you do that is evoke ideas where we have responsibility towards others, not just ourselves. And it's as simple as the golden rule. Everybody learns the golden rule: do unto others. As you know, that's one of the first things we learn as kids is, you know, help each other out, take care of each other, share, right? That's acting on empathy. So we need to start talking about the idea of freedom that comes with responsibility towards others. It seems like a simple idea, but you hardly hear about it anymore. So from that idea of freedom coming with responsibility is this idea of democracy, the progressive idea of democracy. And I would argue that this is the democracy that our nation was founded on, not the current state that we're in. And democracy functions best when people act with responsibility for others, not just for themselves. So that says volumes about campaign spending, you know, the 1% or the 0.5% and elite corporate ownership controlling the political system with money, right? They're acting in their own self-interest. So democracy works only when we act with responsibility for others out of empathy, not just for ourselves. So do you see how those two are connected? You can't have one without the other. You just cannot have real freedom without that type of democracy, which explains a lot in terms of where we're at these days and where we need to go. And then connected to those above ideas, right? These are all systemic. These are all connected. You cannot take away one. They're like building blocks. You can't take one away without the whole thing falling. So the first one is this idea that our private prosperity depends on the public. And we're all the public. We act through government as the public, the commons, whatever you want to call it. And today, how do people view government? Right? People view government as this big, evil, outside, external thing that's going to come and take away all your money through taxes and take away your guns and your personal freedom. Right? Conservatives have succeeded in driving a wedge between the people and their government. When, guess what? The people are the government. Right? My private prosperity depends on everyone else, right? Acting with empathy through democracy to provide what's necessary for freedom, right? I went to public schools my entire life, right? I drive on roads that all of you pay taxes to help build, right? I talk on a cell phone that works from satellites that were largely part of government research, right? All the healthcare advances that we all chip in to provide through the National Institutes of Health and the National Science Foundation, right? These are all things that we do together, and guess what? You can't do them by yourself. So, critical point that conservatives and Republicans want people to ignore. They want that wedge between the people and their government. Okay, we need to start breaking that wall down and building trust. And the only way you do that is through the final point, right? The final point is the linchpin, because the public, so government and our elected officials, have a moral responsibility to do what? To protect and empower the people they serve, right? Not to line their pockets, not to, go off and only serve the 0.5% because they line their pockets and they know that they'll have a job for life when they get out of office, right? So each of those work in harmony, and if you take away one, you take away each one. And that final point there is the linchpin, and is what it is the standard we should hold our elected officials and our government to. So that's how we redefine democracy and freedom. And it's something that we really need to do straight away. It's something that needs to happen, I would say 10 years ago, but we can't go back in a time machine. So one of the final points that I want to underscore is what the Democratic Party of Wisconsin, the DNC, I'm basically talking about the elite establishment of the Democratic Party. So these are the people that pushed Nancy Pelosi on us once again, that have not changed anything for a decade. And here's what they don't get. That these are more than words. That all these ideas that I'm talking about, these are not just words on paper. These are not just things that you type out in a blog or you put in a press release and people will read them and it'll change everything. Right? These are ideas that need to be evoked so that they become physically present in here, in our brains. Because those ideas, once they are in there, they cannot be undone. Right? Just like conservatives have succeeded in planting job creation in all our brains, which evokes this conservative idea of the economy, and how the people who are the ownership class of corporations are these wonderful moral beings because they create jobs. That's in the conservative frame, the conservative worldview, if you will. So that idea of job creation is in there. And you can't undo it, but you can counter it. So these ideas of democracy and freedom in the progressive frame can counter and weaken the conservative idea of freedom and democracy. And what many people currently working in democratic strategy don't understand is that these ideas are more important than the words you put on a page. So I get emails a lot asking, I need a catchy phrase for a campaign. I need a silver bullet phrase to win a campaign. And they don't exist because we don't have these big ideas out there, and we need to get them out there. So we're going to start wrapping here. So if you have any final questions or thoughts, feel free, don't be shy. But if I've covered everything, I'm ecstatic that I've covered everything. So there are things you can do. So here are some ideas. You may have heard of Blue Jean Nation, Mike McCabe's new group. You can get involved with them. You can get involved with them at a local level, at a statewide level, and keep an eye on what they're doing, because there is some really good stuff that's happening to bring people together of all political stripes. And we need that. We need to get out of our internet, our Facebook little bubbles, and get out there and start talking to people who maybe voted for Trump and start connecting on these bigger ideas. Because I guarantee you, start talking to people about these ideas, and you're going to find that you share common ground. And that's where we start. So Blue Jean Nation is one place. Secondly, I would encourage you to get involved and stay involved with your county and local Democratic Party and start really pushing these ideas. Start, pushing a better way, a more effective way, new ideas to start reaching people. That's critically important because it's going to happen at the grassroots level. So that's the second idea. The third thing you can do is, there's a lot of new people on tonight, and a lot of you probably are wondering what the heck this framing stuff is all about, or what is real messaging? What does it mean to me? So you can go to my website, which is www.frameforfuture.com. So it's frame, F-R-A-M-E, the number 4, future.com. And I have a blog. You can view my blog embedded right on the website and follow the blog. And I have a lot of pieces that I wrote leading up to and after the election, looking in great detail at a lot of these issues and sounding some alarms well before the election. So you can look at those. If you like this webinar concept, I have a pretty large group of subscribers that we get together once a month, every third Thursday, and we hold these live webinars, and they get very interactive and discussive, and they last from 7 to 8 once a month. So we do 12 of those a month, and then I send out 2 newsletters a month called the Thinking Points Journal. and I focus on current events and what's going on and ideas for local strategies and better ideas of communication and talking about progressive values and beliefs in a more constructive way. So we do that, and then we do other chat rooms and things like that. So you can go on my website and click on the subscribe tab, and there's a $100 a month fee, or sorry, $100 a year for the subscription. But you get a lot. You get the live webinars, the archives, the Thinking Points journals, and all that stuff. And I also have some good information on my website in terms of other resources and events that are coming up and PowerPoints and things like that. So there's a lot you can do. You can find my email on my website as well if you have any specific questions. So there are things going on. The Wisconsin Grassroots Network, the Rural Caucus, the Democratic Party. So there are groups out there. And the important thing is to start pushing these new, more effective ways of communicating our values and beliefs to people. Outside of issues. We can bring the issues in once we are talking and we have shared values that we connect with people on. Then we can start bringing in issues as they relate to those values. But we really need to start winning hearts and minds. And we really need to start connecting with people. So with that, if there aren't any questions, I'm going to thank you all for your participation and for your time. And feel free to contact me. Again, my email address is on the website, frame4future.com. And I hope to be in touch with you all very soon. Have a great night. Thanks.